Welcome to the Proclaim Peace podcast, where we discuss peacemaking through the lens of the restored gospel. And this season, we're talking about the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. I would like to welcome my co-host, Patrick Mason. Tell me how you're doing today, Patrick.
I'm doing all right. This is beautiful outside. It's early summer. What's not to like?
This is why we're alive, right? To enjoy the
Indeed.
weather, the good weather.
Indeed.
Well, today we're going to talk about, as always, a heavy topic, and we want to tackle the story of Jonathan, David, and Saul. And we want to look at it through the lens of how sometimes conflict that can start at a personal level can radiate out and have really profound effects on society, and what maybe are some steps that we as citizens and individuals can do to kind of mitigate.
Yeah, I think this is a great story. I mean, we saw this in the Book of Mormon too sometimes, but this is another great example in the Bible of the way that, like, sometimes there's really blurry boundaries between, like, the personal and the political, right?
Yeah. And in this case, the spiritual, right?
And
Like it all gets mixed
absolutely.
in. Yep.
Yeah, so it goes up and down and sideways. Yep. And you've got, so here we've got these three really compelling characters, Saul, David, Jonathan, who are complex characters too. It's not just two-dimensional, like good guys, bad guys, but people who have done great things and people who have really listened to the Lord and really sought the welfare of their people. And then the same person connect selfishly and with hostility towards others. And then you've got Jonathan, like, trying to figure it out and go between all of them. And so I actually think it reflects, it's a very human story that I think a lot of us can connect to on lots of levels.
And I think it also represents the kind of way that sometimes we as outsiders to these relationships can get stuck. We see our leaders, we start to follow them or engage with them and believe in them because they were exhibiting virtues that we really appreciated, or they were doing positive things. And then if they start to make decisions that we don't really love, we sort of have a choice at that point. We can either see them as complex characters, we can completely disassociate from them, or we can double down on allowing their problems to become our problems, right? Like we choose to follow them down their paths of, dare I say, wickedness, or at least error. And I think one of the things that I love so much about this story is that Jonathan absolutely refuses to walk those binary paths. He somehow maintains the ability to see the good in both of these individuals, see what they have, the positive things that they have done, while also seeing the negative very clearly, and won't reduce them and somehow to like a simple binary, but manage to sit and stay in relationship with both of them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the lessons I take from this is, like, the leadership really matters. Mm-hmm. And that leaders make decisions and they take people and the people who follow them in a direction that maybe even the people didn't choose at first, as you said, mm-hmm. because they affiliated with that leader because of virtues or because they stood mm-hmm. for things that they believed in. And then through lots of complex events, sometimes they take it in other directions, and all of a sudden you find yourself at war, right, with people that used to be your friends. And so leadership matters. How we talk about leadership matters. How leaders learn how to become better leaders matters. Mm-hmm. And so I'm grateful for this story. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about all of that and how we navigate that, whether we're on the leadership side, whether most of us are on the follower side, mm-hmm. and how do we relate to these leaders who are in complex situations, sometimes of their own making, sometimes not.
And I think one of the things that I hope our listeners get out of this conversation is both that it's really important which leaders we choose, how we choose to follow them, but also that we as citizens or as individuals always have options about how we can kind of try to push, pull, and direct leaders into more virtuous paths. And it benefits us to exercise those options. And sometimes those options, I think we'll learn from our guest today, can maybe be counterintuitive and unexpected, but nonetheless really, really effective. So we are so excited to have with us today Marianne Viray. Marianne is the executive director of Disagree Better, which is a movement dedicated to helping Americans navigate conflict without sacrificing either their convictions or their relationships, which is so much about what this story is about. Marianne's career has spanned public policy, campaign finance reform, national unity initiatives, and democracy-building efforts. And it's really telling to me that this is where she has landed in this moment. She teaches that healthy conflict is not a threat to community, but is actually essential to our well-being. Her work invites us to discover that peace is not the absence of disagreement, but the ability to engage disagreement with dignity. And we're so excited to hear from her today. Welcome, Marianne. We are so glad to have you with us.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you both.
So we are going to jump right into this conversation with the question that we ask all of our guests, which is, how do you define peace?
No, you do, because I hear this on a podcast that you posted. You know, when I was thinking about this over the past week, the concept of peace to me is mutual benefit, right? That I don't get to claim I have peace if it doesn't apply to you as well. That it's a holistic, collective sense of well-being that's deeply rooted in community and in relationship. So that was muddled, but there you go.
Not muddled at all. I actually think
that.
I really like that, the sense of kind of interdependence, that my well-being depends on yours and vice versa. No, I think that's really really beautiful. So, well, let's dive in to the particulars here. We're going to talk about this story of Jonathan and David and Saul, which is such a rich story. I mean, it's one of the major stories of the Old Testament. It goes on and on and on for lots of different chapters. It spends a lot of time on it. So I want to start with thinking about actually something that we haven't talked a ton about on the podcast. It's amazing. We always have like these new topics and new ways to think about peacemaking. But I think one of the places where people oftentimes come into conflict and feel conflict is they feel like that they're in conflict with leaders, whether it be political leaders, religious leaders, maybe even within families, but leaders. Sometimes we actually know those leaders personally. Sometimes we're actually in a relationship. Sometimes they're distant. Right? They live in a state capital or a national capital or something like that. So how do we disagree? How do we productively engage in conflict with leaders without sliding into hostility, into contempt? I mean, how does Jonathan model this in your reading of this story?
Because he's got a couple layers to it, right? Mm-hmm. The king is also dad. And
right. So, that makes it complicated.
That's a whole other dynamic of relationship that he's trying to navigate. But on top of leader, I think there's also his personal values, right? Things that matter to him. And then there's this sidebar covenant that he's made to David. So he's got some different tethers to different people in different positions of power, of popularity, of alignment or allegiance that he's trying to navigate. And that's a tough cookie right there, to try to work through those and navigate them as beautifully as I think Jonathan does.
I'm interested to hear how you think he models and navigates that.
I think that he navigates it by playing the peacemaker with his father, the king, who initially is very supportive of David, and until he hears people chanting that he is triumphant over more than the king is. Mm-hmm. And then envy sets in. And personal pride sets in. And Jonathan, because of his love for David and deep friendship and covenant, he steps in a protective way to his father to say, hey now, like, time out. Like, you don't need to kill him just because somebody's singing a song that he killed more people than you have. Like, how about we not go there? But he does it in a way that doesn't demean him as the king and doesn't attack his humanity. And he's also not doing like the gossip campaign behind his back, but he has an exchange that we have record of where there is a conversation where he's brave enough to have that conversation with his father, the king, and say, hey, you might want to think about this. Could we not do this? Could you maybe do that? Like, there's a different way of handling this than the way I think you're handling it. And I think that took a lot of courage.
I completely agree. And it sort of opens up the question that a lot of when we think about conflict and peace building, we think about doing it with people that we're already in an adversarial relationship with. Mm-hmm. But it's a really different kind of process when you are asking someone that you love or you want to maintain an allegiance with, when you're highlighting, hey, things aren't going well, right? I don't like how you're behaving. I'm concerned about the outcomes that might result. So tell us a little bit about what you see there in terms of what is it teaching us about what it's like to practice peacemaking with those we actually are in alliance with, not that those that we're necessarily in overt disagreement with.
Yeah. I think it's having the courage to engage as a peacemaker, right? Not peacekeeping, right?
Yeah.
That like you talk about the difference there, that this isn't placating, this isn't rolling over, this isn't self-silencing, this isn't passive aggressive. This is direct conversation saying, I'm going to call you out here and I'm going to do it in a respectful way. And I'm going to tell you what I'm seeing. And I think there's another way you might not be looking at this in the best light, in the best angle. Could you consider a different approach? And that enables the preservation of the relationship because you're having the dialogue, you're addressing the issue, and you're expressing concerns that are legitimate to you about their behavior and the potential outcomes, in this case, murder, war, not small things.
Yeah.
And so I think it shows some courage that it is possible and the relationship can withstand that. A good relationship can handle it.
What about when the situation is a little different? I mean, I don't have a personal relationship with most of my elected representatives, right? Or many of my church leaders, right? I do with the local ones, not with other ones. So there's all kinds of leaders in my life who make decisions, sometimes big decisions, that do impact me or impact other people that I care about. But I don't have a relationship either to preserve or to rely on.
You're right.
Or to appeal to. Do these same principles hold true in those cases? So something a little different than what we have here with Jonathan and Saul. What happens when I can't text, my senator directly?
Yeah, you don't have their phone number direct, right? They're not responding. I think the opportunity there is, what can you do to make your voice known in a respectful way that they might listen to? And so are you part of a larger collective that then has greater voice and impact because you're part of many with the same concerns around water rights and issues, or a data center, or whatever the case may be? Are you collectively engaging in order to elevate the concerns that you have in a constructive, productive way? I think that citizens don't avail themselves of the opportunity to call that hotline, drop that note. And I think MWEG is a beautiful example of piece by piece and like those active engagements, the note card, our thank you campaign effort as well. But like those efforts of saying, I'm going to praise the leaders for doing and behaving in ways that are in alignment with my values, even if the outcome isn't what I want, because that process matters, that disposition matters, that willingness to engage matters. And from my conversations with leaders, a thank you note for just being civil, for having, an engagement that is productive and recognizing the good that some leaders are trying to do goes a long way with those leaders. Like that civility cuts through the hate, because they get so much hate, and that someone who calls and just says, I have a concern and I'm going to share it with you and I'm going to do it in a respectful way. And I hope you'll consider these policy positions. And if someone calls and says, hey, I just want to thank you, like you had an opportunity to go low against your rival in this primary election. You chose a higher road. Although you're not my preferred candidate, I just want to say I appreciate the way you're approaching it and thank you. That's sticky. Like that lands and that sticks and they remember it.
I love that if even if I don't have a personal relationship, that I'm proactive about not only having a distance relationship around negativity or critique.
Yeah, that's right.
That I get to choose that relationship. It may not be fully reciprocal, and but I get to choose what kind of relationship I do have with those leaders, and meaning the kinds of communications that I'm sending.
Yeah. I'm going to share a truism about me that I just sent a text to a friend a couple of days ago that basically consisted of me saying, it was about a person who is in government. And I just said, I am actively working to not dislike this person because contempt is corrosive to me. Like I necessarily cannot control their behavior, but and my joke was that I feel like they just keep making it harder and harder for me. Like no matter how hard I pray, like I get myself to the next level of, I will not see you through contemptuous eyes. And then they work harder to make that difficult for me. But it's a growth experience.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. They're just giving you an
Exactly. But I would love to have you just amplify that a little bit. Like in your experience with Disagree Better, like I would love to have you tell us a little bit about your work. But Could you talk to us about the ramifications, both that you hope it will have with leaders, but also then how you hope it will change the hearts? I mean, you've mentioned gratitude, the hearts of citizens as well, because I think sometimes we think a little bit like me, well, if that person would just behave better, then I wouldn't have a problem with them. When in fact, sometimes whether they behave or not a certain way, the problem is still with me as a citizen.
Happy to share a little bit about Disagree Better with you and your audience. Disagree Better is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that works to reduce polarization in America. And we do that specifically in partnership with leaders across the aisle from each other. We focus on leadership modeling because, like it or not, broad culture takes some cues from leaders. And if those leaders are giving out really lousy cues of this kind of behavior is normal, then that's the bar. And if they give better cues, then, that is influential. And so the social science research shows that leaders are part of the problem in how we treat each other and how we talk about each other, that because political discourse has nosedived over the past couple of decades, that is actually in correlation to the amount of political violence that we're seeing. That a politician saying something along the lines of, well, I'd punch him in the face. Well, there is an escalation of violence because you just gave permission to that thought that someone might have had, whether or not that was anticipated or intended by you as a leader. And so they are held to a bigger standard, a higher standard, because their microphone and their pulpit is that much larger, right? To amplify their message, they have the platform to do that. And so we are trying to work with leaders to say, there's a better way. There's a better way for you to treat each other, and people are paying attention. So will you model a better discourse? And we're not asking you to change your policy positions. We're asking you to engage in a more constructive, productive way for our democracy. And what we have found with individuals that they are very receptive of this message, that Americans are frankly hungry for leaders that model some semblance of dignity and respect and civility. And so they engage with our content really beautifully, and they are willing to write letters of gratitude to politicians from both parties that are on a stage, engaging with each other in productive, constructive, friendly ways. And then those leaders eat that up, and it helps incentivize them to behave more like this. Because if anything I know about having a puppy or a toddler is the behavior that we incentivize wins. So if we pay attention to the negative behavior, that is what will rule the roost. If we pay more attention to the constructive, productive behavior, that's what we will see more of. So Americans have a lot of power and influence, as do leaders. And we need that cycle of influence to be reciprocal and like spiral upward rather than downward.
It must be a lot of fun to be running an organization that is essentially just trying to incentivize virtue, right? We don't see a lot of that in our public sphere right now. People are looking for outcomes, or they're trying to achieve power. And basically, it sounds like what you're trying to do with both leaders and with citizens is just to incentivize good behavior and model good behavior in a way that sort of breaks that negative kind of downward spiral that we find ourselves in.
That's right. That's right. And, it is interesting. I get to see comments from people that have dropped a note of gratitude to a couple senators that were recently featured in a public service announcement that we launched a couple weeks ago. And it was an advisory board member. She's a journalist and an award-winning author. And she's like, that was great. You gave me something positive to do. It felt like detox. I want to do something like that every day. So just the sense of having something positive and constructive to activate around is good for people when there is so much doom and gloom and hopelessness that leads to a sense of overwhelm and freezing, that this activation is good. It gives something positive to do. And on the reciprocal side, the letters that I've seen that have come from these senators or governors, two individuals that have written thank you notes, is just like, let me thank you for thanking me. Like they appreciated it. It genuinely landed, and they felt rewarded personally for like going on that stage and preaching that message around how political violence was really hard for their family last year. This was Governor Shapiro. He sent some people a letter and said, thank you for, letting me know that you heard the message I was preaching and that it resonated with you, because that experience sucked. Like,
Yeah.
I hated it. And it was really hard for me and my family. And the fact that you let me know that it mattered to you helps me feel like it was worth me being courageous and sharing that story and experience like I did.
So what I'm hearing, my takeaway is that politicians are like puppies and toddlers. And maybe we all are, right? We all like positive reinforcement. We all like constructive engagement. But it's so hard, right? I mean, we live in such polarized times. I mean, this is the very, reason for being, for your organization, for the work that you do. And almost every incentive is to choosing sides. Right? Here in America, we have a two-party system. Other countries are a little bit different, but here we have two parties, right? Everything is about polarized. Which side are you on? Are you left or are you right? Are you woke or are you MAGA? Are you, and all of this, and
those binaries abound, don't they?
Absolutely, right? Which easily turns into good and evil, right? Righteous and wicked. So how does, I think one of the remarkable things about this story, kind of bringing it back to this story is that Jonathan, even while Saul and David, they have their camps, right? And they have their sides and they've got their partisans on both sides and both sides have their stories about the other, somewhat, grounded in reality. And then those narratives take on a life of their own. And Jonathan loves both of them, right? How do you love people on both sides? How do you sit in that middle? Because both sides want you to come to their side. They'll see you. Wait, you're still talking to that other side, right? Judas, I mean, you're betraying us and all these kinds of. You're not sufficiently pure, right? So how do we? What does Jonathan teach us? How do we be more like Jonathan in terms of like loving people on both sides?
Yeah, he's so courageous in that, isn't he? Because he refuses to let himself be pulled over to one side or the other, despite having made a covenant and being the son of, but he is like squarely in the, I'm going to love you both. And this is a hot mess of a situation. And I'm going to try to do what I can to be repair, to facilitate repair. And society doesn't like that. Those binaries are so easy to fall into, and we have to actively work against them in our own minds in order to hold that middle ground and be comfortable, frankly, with everyone being dissatisfied with us. And that is really hard to ask of people. And that's absolutely Jesus's pathway, right? Is that vengeance is his, not ours, that our mandate is to love. And that means everyone and not just our tribe. And that's the harder walk. That's the harder walk. And I think he does it by not losing the love or humanity or understanding or perspective he has of each of the sides. Like, he doesn't let them become a two-dimensional image bearer. He doesn't let them become good and evil. They are nuanced. They are complicated. That's where he sits, is in that space of acceptance of these individuals, as flawed as they all are, of saying, I'm going to love you despite this. I'm going to love you despite this. I think you're both wrong here and here. And I'm not going to let the relationship end over that.
So one of the things that strikes me as so beautiful about what you've said is that I think the only way someone like Jonathan, or us, if we want to play that same role in our society, the only way that we ever, the source of the courage and the moral strength to do something like that, to put yourself in opposition to literally everyone, that probably the most profound and sincere motivator is what you mentioned, is love, is just maintaining a true, deep, affectionate, sincere, reflective love of both parties or groups. And then you draw on that love as sustenance and strength as you sort of stand up and stand in the middle. And one of the other things that, and this is just a little bit off topic, but I would love to hear you kind of maybe share thoughts about this. One of the things that I also think that those people that can maintain that clarity of love also are the only ones that in situations like that actually maintain clarity of vision. Because loving someone else doesn't mean that you don't see their flaws. What it means is that you don't lose sight of their virtues, right? So I mean, I would love to hear your thoughts about that. How can we, what can we bring to our society by being willing to occupy this middle space? What do we see that other people don't?
I think real peacemakers that really can carve out that space of that middle ground see people's lived experiences for what they are. They
Mm.
all frame us, and so understanding someone's story, their personal experience, things that have led them to believe what they believe, allows no space for judgment, right? That's off the table. If I had experienced what they had experienced, that very well may likely be my position or my path. And you're able to see that and understand and therefore accept, like, I'm not here to change that. That is what they experienced. And you just get to hold it. You get to acknowledge it. And when in moments of success, when I try that and I'm really putting judgment to this side, like, all I have is incredible compassion for the weight of people's lived experiences that aren't my own. Right. And like, but for the grace of God go I. Yeah, I would have that experience if I was raised in the home you were raised in the community you were raised in the conditions you were raised in. That would be my lived experience as well. And it wasn't. And it helps me see the burdens that other people carry that inform their beliefs.
Yeah. So I'm struck by, the way that you're talking about this. Part of what you're talking about is sort of like breaking a cycle, right? Like that we're immersed in these things. There are all these narratives that we're fed. There's all these incentives that we're given, and you're inviting people to like make a decision to like not continue the cycle, to break the cycle. Even if you can't do it for the whole country, can you do it for yourself, right? And then start from there. And I think this is one of the really admirable things about David in this story. I mean, David has his issues along the way, but he has these multiple opportunities to kill Saul.
Yeah.
While
Like
protecting himself. Multiple,
Yeah.
right? He could have done it on many occasions, and he would have been. I think the story makes it clear that he would have been justified in doing so, right? Self-defense, and and protecting others, and all the kinds of reasons that we could do it. But he kind of refuses to become the thing that he's fighting against, right? So how do we do that? What are some basic lessons or some basic tools that we can do? Because it is the easiest thing to do, right? There's this principle, in René Girard, who's like this theorist of conflict, talks about mimesis, that we imitate. It's one of the most fundamental things we do as human beings, right? We imitate other people, including, the way that they engage in conflict with us, and then we ramp it up and so forth. And so much of what we see in politics is just mimesis. It's just people imitating and then becoming the thing that they hate, that they said they hated like 5 minutes ago, and now they're just doing it, right?
Yeah.
And ramping it up.
Yeah.
What do we do? What are the tools? What are the practices that we can do to foresee that, to check it, and then to break the pattern?
Amanda Ripley wrote a whole book about high conflict, which I really like, and I wish I could remember all of her points. But the only way to break a cycle is to do something different, to introduce a new approach, and that imitation is just repeating that cycle. And so I think the way we break it is in approaching it differently than we've approached it before, right? That is the only way that something is going to change, is to introduce a new approach, introduce a new component. If that's my energy, if that's my inquiry, if that's my ability to listen, something's got to shift. Otherwise, we will keep getting the spiral. I just got a text the other day from a friend who, she and I have had lots of conversations about conflict and how to navigate personal relationships, especially with close family. And she just sent me a note the other day to let me know of a little victory that she had had in a conversation, meaning the conversation didn't go the same way it has gone for the past several years. Why? Because she introduced a new element. And the new element she was able to introduce was to have enough presence of mind to take a really deep breath and to say what she wanted to say in a more calm way than she had said it in every other conversation about those hot topics before. And her ability to modulate her body and her voice and respond with basically the same set of words that she'd used before, but without all the heat coming into it, enabled the other side to concede that she had a point. Not that they accepted it, just that they could see it. And she said, we are on new footing. And it's only because I was able to get it to this point. And I'm just so grateful because this is the healthiest this relationship has been in 2 years. Right. And so she's looking forward to the next opportunity where she's hopeful that the next point she'll get to make is, I see you. I understand what you're saying. I get it from your point of view. I get why you would think that. So she's got this mindset now of looking for that opportunity to find agreement with him. So she's already introduced one tool, which is ourselves, right? Our bodies, our brains, our emotional state, her ability to articulate something in a calmer way. Now she's got an eye to another step, which is I'm going to look for a way I can agree with him.
And
but that's
validate him.
transformative.
Mm-hmm.
And validate him. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that I just love about what you've just shared is I think it's really easy for us to think about the way that our society is polarizing and all the negative effects that are flowing out of that as being entirely and completely beyond our individual control. It just feels like we are swept up in a tornado, literally a conflict tornado, right? That we do not have the capacity or the ability to kind of stop swirling. But I love the way that the steps you've just described, both in finding one small thing that we can control and then responding and trying to give that same gift back to another person, are completely and totally within our control. Like it is a way that you're offering our listeners not some theoretical system that will change the world, but an actual practical set of steps that they can put into practice in their own lives to start to make change.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen this in myself. There was a time in my marriage to my lovely husband, James, where anytime we were having a conversation about a heated topic, if he didn't agree with me, I lost my mind. We didn't start out that way in our 20s. We absolutely got that way. And by we, I mean me in my mid to late 30s. And I don't know why. I've got to go to more therapy to figure that out. But it was destroying our relationship because what happened was he would shut down. He's like, she just went from a 2 to a 12 in a hot second. I don't know what to do with this. So I guess we don't get to engage in dialogue anymore. So I'm just going to say, oh yeah, sounds good. Okay, I've got to jump on this call and like bail because I was taking it as an assault of my intelligence. I was taking it as an attack on my value as a person, on my worth, and I couldn't handle it. And it was destroying our connection. It was destroying our relationship. And props to him, like A, he's still married to me. And B, he had to let me know that like, this isn't working and something's going to shift. Either you've got to do some work here or just know that these 20 topics are just off limits. Like I'm not going to engage because this is how you respond and it's not productive and I'm just shutting down. So like something's got to change here. And I had to figure out how I could stay and engage in conversation with the person I loved the most in the world. But I had to figure that out. And now we're to a better place where I can hold an issue a little further out from my personal identity. But there was a rough patch of about a decade where that was really not my go-to. And I've had to do a lot of work here. All that to say, that was maybe too much information, but all that to say, like, we are capable of behaving differently. We can make these personal choices, Jen, that you just referred to. Like, there is power, and that power is in us and in how we choose to approach people in relationship that we are with.
So the million, billion, trillion dollar question is, can that work in politics?
Deep sigh.
Yeah, right? It has to. Like, because that was the foundation of our democratic system, was mutual respect, was mutual tolerance, was competing ideas and working together for solutions for the betterment of a country. So it has to.
So one of the things that I think is so illustrative about this story is the way that this interpersonal conflict between Saul and David quickly spirals beyond an interpersonal conflict into a societal conflict. And, you know, to the point that Patrick made earlier, they then come up with their camps and their size, and it was a private disagreement, but now it becomes very public. Tell us a little bit about what you think that has to teach us as individuals about how we can act in ways that kind of stop the spreading of that virus. right? So we might not have been the origin of the virus. We might not have been case zero, in the pandemic we're experiencing. But there are things that we can do to help help to contain. Like we've given some thought on this podcast about what we can do as individuals to sort of reduce the conflict. But do you think there are also things that we can do to help contain the conflict and just have it not spread so quickly? Because sometimes that's a fair battle to fight, right?
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think leveraging our power where we see that we have it has value, has merit. I think not weaponizing the institutions that are meant to be like the place where these discussions and disagreements are held, are contained within bounds, within norms, within rules. If we weaponize those spaces, that makes it real easy to turn things into societal, into governmental concerns and issues that go off rails quite quickly. And so I think there's something that we need to get back to, which is that these institutions are designed to form us, that there's some character formation there that we've lost sight of as a community, as a country, and recognizing that like there are conflict entrepreneurs that make bazillions of dollars off stirring the pot and like checking that and not allowing those tremendous influences to rule our brains and our emotional responses to things are a few thoughts. I don't know, Patrick, I'm curious what else comes to mind to you for that question.
No, I really like what you said, that we have to be realistic about those other forces out there, right? Turning a blind eye or plugging our ears, that doesn't do any good. But we do have to decide that we're going to act. And I really liked the answer to your, that you gave earlier of whether we can do this in our politics. I think the only answer is like, we have to, right? We have to figure this out. We have to, and this is, we talked about it all last season when talking about the Book of Mormon, because we know if we stay on this road, it doesn't go anywhere good. Yeah. So like we have to find the off ramps, and that's an individual decision, but politics is a collective business, right?
Yeah.
And we have to find ways to do it collectively too. And it might be small collectives, it might be MLEG, it might be Disagree Better, it might be the Waymakers. We start with these, in the places where we can, and the networks that we can, but we have to maintain hope.
I mean, one of the things that I, in opportunities that I have to speak publicly or engage with communities is like this, we get to choose, we elect these folks. There's some power there. They're not appointed in all cases. Like, so how a politician treats other people an issue that you care so much about that you're willing to vote on it. If you're going to be a single issue voter, and many are, would you consider letting this be the issue? Because frankly, their ability to do this better means we have a functioning government.
Yeah.
It means we will get to the better, durable solutions that are best for most Americans. It means there will be more bipartisan, co-sponsorship, and we will have a functioning Congress if people would approach each other like this. They'll approach each other like this if they are incentivized to do so. Mm-hmm. Well, we've got some power there. And there are some institutional boundaries and limitations around that. Our primary system does not necessarily support that type of vote, right? But are people willing to go to a city council and say to their city council in a hearing, I want to understand better how you talk to each other, how you talk about each other. That matters to me more than you filling this pothole or deeming this park a zone for some, the latest pickleball court or like whatever the issue is in front of the city. I care about how you treat each other, and that because of those relationships, I know you will function better as a body. So can we as citizens make that a mandate for ourselves in how we choose to engage, who we support, who we elect, who we donate to, who we champion? Could civility, could respect be one of those markers that we pay more attention to?
So because I'm the action item gal, Patrick, I do this all the time to people on this podcast. I'm like, what are our takeaway points? I feel like I love what the two of you have just sort of described. So if I'm a citizen and I'm in despair about the state of affairs and this, and the answer to my question is, what can I do to kind of help stop the spread and inoculate society? I hear you guys have told me 3 things that are actually really within my purview. And I'm going to add the 4th, which you talked about originally, is just making individual change. So first, I'm going to make individual change so that I'm not being a center point of conflict, that it's not spinning off me as well. The second thing I heard you say is supporting institutions, that I as a citizen can sustain and support the institutions that are under attack, that put guardrails around our systems and around our leaders. And sort of if the leaders are acting in ways that make them start to threaten the systems and the institutions, then it's my job to also protect the institutions. The third thing I heard you guys say that Patrick said is that do this in community. Don't expose yourself alone. Find a group of like-minded people who are willing to build towards peace and gather with them and do that work together. And then the last thing I hear you guys saying is communicate to your elected officials that your highest priority is them actually being able to do the job you've hired them to do by being collaborative, right? Like to work with other people. And those are things that every single person could get off this call and do within a week or 2. You could figure out a way to start to change yourself. You could figure out a way that you're going to act in the next few weeks to support an institution that matters to you. You could figure out what community you're going to join that is espousing the values that you see. And then you can figure out how to communicate to a leader about the values that you want them to model. And suddenly this problem that we started this conversation with that felt very amorphous and scary to me feels much more containable to me. And maybe that's just my Pollyanna, but I think it's true.
Because you have a list now, and lists matter.
Yeah.
And those are really easy things to check off, right? It's just like, oh, Tuesday, I'll do that. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, Marianne, this has been incredible. Love your insight. Love all the work that you're doing. We normally close with just one question, but because you're so insightful, I'm going to ask you 2 questions to close with. They're related, and I'll let you choose how you want to answer them. So we always ask, where do you find peace? But I also want to ask the related question of what gives you hope. Mm-hmm. In this work that you do, it's easy to lose hope. So what gives you hope in the work that you do, and then where do you find peace in your own personal walk?
I'll give you 2 sources of hope. As I focus our work on leaders, recruiting leaders to preach this message, we are finding a number of leaders at local, state, federal levels that are 100% all in with preaching this message. For example, last week, we were just filming with 12 U.S. mayors of different parties, new content. We're filming more content with state legislators next month. Why? Because they get it, because they are bought in. This is how they want to lead. This is the ethos and, the principles that inspired them to run for office in the first place, many of them. And so I see leaders wanting to do the right thing for the right reasons and wanting to find solutions for real life problems for people, and know that those best solutions are found in collaboration and in perspective taking. So that gives me hope that there are leaders out there standing up to our call to say, put me in content, let me be part of your initiative. And that gives me hope. What also gives me hope is how well these messages are being received, that people are hungry for leaders modeling this. And there is a vast exhausted majority of Americans, and they are movable from being exhausted to being engaged. And that gives me hope. Where do I find peace? Nature. Breathe some mountain air helps me a lot.
So it's a good thing you live near the mountains. So.
Yes, it is.
Marianne, this has been terrific. Thank you. And really, we're so grateful for the work that you do, for the hope that you're doing, and the concrete things that you're doing. I think it's so important. Leadership does matter. And so it's important for us to select and vote for the kinds of leaders that we want, but then also cultivate and provide models that they can come into. And what you're doing is just an extraordinary example of that. So thank you.
Well, thank you both for your voices and your friendship. Appreciate you. Thanks for having me today.
Such a joy to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Proclaim Peace. To hear more, you can subscribe on a podcast app of your choice or on YouTube. You can always find full show notes or transcriptions at proclaimpeace.org.
Proclaim Peace is a partnership between MWEG and Waymakers. You can learn more about Waymakers at waymakers.us. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.